Hello and welcome to the HanDrinksSolo Wine info channel, where we talk about wine science and wine history and unusual cultivars and some of the rising winemaking stars that are coming out of the South African winelands. Now, if this is your thing, then please subscribe to the channel before you leave. But today, what we're talking about is the Blacksmith Wines Vin Blanc 2017, made by winemaker Tremayne Smith. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Tremayne and his background. We're going to talk about his winemaking ethos. And then finally, we'll taste the wine in the glass and try to figure out how it got to taste that way. But first, Tremayne the man. Tremayne started his professional life by training to be a chef, but he then abandoned the kitchen in order to inhabit the wine cellar. And along the way, he's had some incredible mentors, including David Trafford from Trafford Wines and Andrea Mullineux, previous International Winemaker of the Year and kind of head honcho at the Mullineux Family Wines. And then he also went on to become the vineyard manager for Sane Wines in the Agulhas Wine Triangle, which is also owned by David Trafford. Finally, he then became the head winemaker at Fable Wines in Tulbagh, but even this wasn't enough to contain him, and he realized he needed to stick it to the man and turn his full-time passion to the project of Blacksmith Wines, which is what he does now. If we want to understand what makes the man tick, it's best to look at the sorts of wines that he makes. And the pinnacle of all the various ranges that he's involved in is a range called the Horseman. Now, this project is a joint venture between winemaker Tremayne Smith and viticulturist Jaco Engelbrecht, probably one of South Africa's most renowned viticulturists. As an aside, if you are a vine geek or a viticulturist geek, this is one man that you have to follow. But back to the joint venture of Horseman Wines. You might ask, what does this tell us? Well, right off the bat, any project where winemaker and viticulturist get to share the limelight equally is an unusual but delightful start. Because many people say, wow, great wine starts in the vineyards. And yet the reality is we have loads and loads of rockstar winemakers, but very few rockstar viticulturists, and there really should be more of them, which is why I love a project that actually walks the walk and puts winemaker and viticulturist alongside each other in the limelight. Now, when it comes to Tremayne's general ethos across all his wine ranges, his big focus is on sustainability. And so you'll see that throughout, he chooses to work with cultivars that are suited to their climate and that can be dry land farmed in order to be able to drastically reduce water usage, especially in the vineyards. In fact, in the vineyards, water usage is zero. He also aspires to the generally accepted base tenets of natural winemaking in that he only uses spontaneous fermentation, adds little or no sulfur, and works with vineyards that are farmed in a sustainable manner. He also usually chooses more neutral vessels like concrete or old oak in order to perform his fermentations, and he keeps all filtration to an absolute minimum. Finally, and probably most importantly, Tremayne values the farming of the vineyards as highly as he values the winemaking process. And that is why we love Tremayne Smith. And at this point, you might be like, well, that's all good and well, Han, but what is the wine like in the glass? Well, up front, I can tell you that this wine is almost 2/3 Chenin Blanc. And then it's almost 1/3 Viognier, finally topped up with about 11% Semillon. But those are all fairly familiar cultivars, and none of them really prepares you for what it's like in the glass. When we give it a sniff, well, on the nose, it's pretty darn serious. There are these sort of waxy lanolin notes followed by flint and chalk, and then there's lemon rind, and then some slightly tertiary dried flowers, followed up by peach fruit, and even some spicy ginger ale. It's really fascinating. As we can see from the bottle, this is a 2017 vintage, so there are going to be some tertiary notes, like those dried flower elements. And tertiary means that these aromas that we smell are the result of various compounds in the bottle reacting over time to produce new aromas and flavors. But there is also a kind of savory, salty element to the aromas, which is the result of oxidative winemaking. And what has happened here is that Tremayne has allowed plenty of oxygen into the winemaking early on in the process. And this triggers a whole different range of volatile aromas, which we can discuss at another time. When we move on to the palate, well, immediately, the two things are super impressive are all that texture and all that concentration. But the fruit is also multifaceted because you have a kind of bitter marmalade going on with a salted lime and then sweet peach fruit. So there are these dynamics going on in the wine that are quite beguiling. And the tail end is no slouch either, as it lingers longer than the credits reel on an Avengers film. Perhaps as a parting thought, one of the marks of success for me in a blended wine is when the various components combine to form something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And this is certainly what happens here. It's tough to pin down any single component, and yet the end result is fascinating. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But as I said, if you enjoy this sort of thing, then subscribe to the HanDrinksSolo YouTube channel, where we talk about wine science and wine history and unusual cultivars and some of the rising winemaking stars that come out of the South African winelands.